Hey y'all, it's Ashley Bookishrealm and I'm back with another video. As you can see from the title of this video, I am here to talk a little bit about my annotating process. So I have already done a couple of these videos. I think the last time I did an annotation video was probably in 2020. So it's time for an update. I don't typically make these every year, but I try to make them every couple of years because I feel like my annotation process does change slightly from year to year, and I, evolve as a reader, and I kind of change how I want to do my annotation process. So funny thing about this video, this is the patron January pick video of the month. So this video was going to come out at the end of January. I filmed it, it was coming out, and my mic was not connected the entire time that I filmed the video. So when I sat down to go edit, there was no audio. So that's great. So this is the January pick. If you're part of my patron group at a certain level, at a certain tier, you get to vote on a video that you would like to see me do every month. So this is the video that we chose and voted on in January, which, yes, I'm excited to be doing another annotation video. If you're new here, make sure you click that subscribe button, hit that bell if you don't want to miss any videos from me, and also go ahead and give this video a thumbs up. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in and get started. I don't want this video to be super long because I don't really think there's a lot of things for me to cover, but I think there are a couple of basic things that I often get asked questions about. So before I even show you basically like the stuff that I use to annotate, and then I'll show you some examples of what I annotate. A couple of common questions that I typically get are, do I annotate every book that I read? And no, I do not annotate every book that I read. I think that my book buying habits have changed a lot anyway, so let's start there. So since my book buying habits have changed a lot, I typically am now purchasing books that like I've already read from the author and I know that I'm gonna like their work, or it's something that I'm super anticipating, or it's a book that I've already read and I now want a physical copy. So 9 times out of 10, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm annotating every book that I'm reading, because I don't physically own every book that I'm reading, and sometimes I don't go back and reread that book and then annotate it. So it varies, y'all. Sometimes I feel like annotating, sometimes I don't feel like annotating. I do think that sometimes I do feel like, dang, I really need to annotate this book, or I need to annotate every physical book that I pick up, but it's just not humanly possible for me to do that, I think, with some stuff. And then you also run that risk sometimes of annotating a book that you end up not liking, and then there's nothing that you could do with that book. I have a couple of those that I've annotated, and it's like, I didn't like the book, I really don't want it in my collection, but I can't give it back to like a bookseller or like a secondhand store for credit, and I don't want to donate it because I've literally written in all of my stuff. So I can be picky, sometimes I'm not, but I think I am a little bit more on the pickier side, because if I annotate a book, it's something that I really want to keep in my collection. Another question that I typically get is, why do you annotate your books? I annotate my books because I think that it helps me engage with the text in a different way. Not to saying that I get more or less when I'm, for example, just listening to a book on audio, or I am, reading a book and I'm not annotating it. I think that when I do annotate, it does help me engage more, and it honestly, it does help me write my reviews a little bit easier. Not saying that all my reviews are hard, but it does help me kind of gauge exactly where I was feeling about certain things. And then I love annotating books that I have the intention of going back and rereading. And one of the examples that I do plan on rereading the book this year. So it's going to be nice to reread the book as I am, it's going to be nice to look at my annotations. That's what I meant to say. It's going to be nice to look at my annotations as I'm rereading the book, because then I can annotate on top of my annotations. And I think it's just a fun way to kind of personalize your books and to show how you've engaged with the text. And every time you reread a book, it changes. At least for me, it does. I can't speak for everyone, but every time that I reread a book, it's a different experience. I pick up on something that maybe I didn't pick up on before, or I notice something, or I see a particular pattern that the author is using. So it's always fun to see that even as you get older, your whole entire life experience changes every single day. So how you engage with the text you read 2 years ago is going to be different, 2 2 years into the future. So I think it's just interesting seeing that experience written down. It's one thing, I think, to feel that change in that experience, to go back and reread something that was like a hit for you back in the day, but I think it's even more intriguing to go back and reread something and actually see where your mind was in the moment, like the written out text, which I think is really, really cool. So I think those are probably the most common questions that I get in terms of my annotation stuff. I will show you the supplies, talk a little bit about my annotation system, and then I'll show you a few examples of things that I have annotated. I will go ahead and tell you that when you see a lot of these annotation videos, people have a particular system that they use for every single book. So whenever they use their sticky tabs, their tabs typically mean the same thing for every book that they annotate. That is not what I do, because I think that my annotation system for the most part shifts from book to book, because I look for different things and I have different expectations going into different books. That even changes when it comes down to genre. I don't annotate a contemporary book in the same way that I would annotate a science fiction or fantasy book. I think there's different elements that I'm looking for, particularly like world building and stuff like that, magic system. Those are things that I would highlight in like a science fiction fantasy book that I'm not going to be looking for in a contemporary book. So my annotation system is not necessarily going to be the same. I think the two things that I do use the same colors for are going to be plot development and character development. Those are kind of my baseline colors for everything, because in every book that I read, I am looking for plot development and character development. That's one thing that I kind of highlight whenever I am writing my reviews. I look at how well the author is able to craft the characters and how, well the plot moves along based off of what my expectations are. So those are my two base colors, but everything else is relatively different. So when I show you this stuff, I just don't want that expectation to be like, oh, okay, Ashley has the same annotation system for every book. So unfortunately, where I know that there have been some creators who have said like, here's my annotation system. If you want to use it and try it out and see if it fits for you, go ahead and use it. I can't offer you that resource. I can't give you an annotation system that you could use for your own personal books. Unfortunately, I wish I could give you a system that you could use and you could try out, but the only thing that I can give you is kind of my tips and tricks for what I do when I annotate, and you could use that, but my system is not consistent enough to say, hey, here's a system that you can try and you can basically, use it if you want, see if you like it, adjust as needed. But hey, maybe you'll get some ideas of what I've have used my system for, and maybe that will help you figure some things out. Okay, so the first thing that I want to talk about are the supplies that I use when I do annotate my books. So I do have this pouch pencil case holder. This came in an Owl Crate box years ago, and I've had it for such a long time, and it is super convenient. I absolutely love it. It's a way to keep me organized because my pens just end up everywhere. And I was using, and I'll show you, because I was using a specific ballpoint pen, which was just a big ballpoint pens, and they look like this. So these were the ballpoint pens that I was using, which I still do technically use those ballpoint pens a lot of times. However, I was at work, and at work we have kind of this box that we keep in our break room, where if people have things like, if you're cleaning out your desk and you're like, oh, I have all this stuff in, I don't want to take it home, I don't need it on my desk anymore, if someone wants it here, you could take it. So we have like this free item box, and somebody must have cleaned out their desk and they had a lot of good stuff in there. I don't know who it came from, but I'm glad that they did clean out their desk, because I found these in that box. So these are the pens that I've been using for my annotating now, because they're a finer tip and I like using a smaller tip. The ballpoint pens are good, but the tip is not fine enough in the way that I like it. And these, I believe, are just, fine line rollerball gel ink, and they're used for drawing and writing. And I don't know much about this company. It just says Diamond Gel Ink Pen, and they're 0.5 millimeters. So basically this is what one of them looks like. Zoom in so you can see. And this is how fine that tip is, which is what I really like. Plus, I think that with this, I was getting a lot more variety in color in terms of like matching up with my tabs. So one thing that I do use, and this could be a tip or trick that may work for you, is that I underline in the color that I'm going to tab in. So if I'm underlining a section that may be blue for character development, I am going to use a blue pen in order to underline that section, because see, I don't necessarily tab as I go. I may read 50 pages of a book and then I'll go back and tab. But if I didn't use the color pens to underline like what I'm reading as I'm going, or what I'm highlighting, whether that's character development, a particular quote that I like, part of a magic system, world building, whatever, if it was all in black, I wouldn't remember what tabs to use, and then I would have to go back and reread the section, then try to figure it out. It just would end up being a hot mess and too much at one time. So I do use a color, the same color, to match the tabs that I'm using, and this definitely gave me a wider range, because I think I used the tabs that they've got to be like 7 or 8 colors, and I will show y'all those next. But this has all the colors of the tabs that I use, so I just felt like I was more prepared in having these than using the Bic pens, because the Bic pens don't have as much variety. So those are the pens that I do use in order to underline. I don't use a ruler when I underline, because people are like, well, what do you use to underline? I use my bookmark, which it's easy because it's already marking my place and it has a straight edge, and my lines don't have to be perfect. Sometimes my lines are crooked, sometimes my lines just go all over the place. That's what makes it have a little bit of personality, because it's your book in your collection, and you're not doing this particularly for anyone to see. This is for you. So, you know, if your lines are not straight, whatever, but if you're like me and you want some semblance of your lines being in line with the text, then I definitely would recommend using your bookmark as your ruler. I don't have a separate ruler for all of that. So these are the tabs that I use, and it is 7 color tabs. I know people who use, like, there's ones out there that are like 10 colors. I don't ever really need that many, and there's very few books that I own that use all 7 colors at one time. I think at the max I probably use about 5 colors at a time, but for books, especially science fiction and fantasy books, I have a tendency to use all the colors, because there's just a lot more components, which goes back to the point where I was saying that I change my system every time I annotate, because of the fact that there's different components based on the genre, the author, what book it's just so much. So I do use these. These are the bigger tabs. Back in the day, I used to use smaller ones, which I wish I had an example of them, but I don't think I do have an example like on me right now. But I used to use the smaller tabs, but the smaller tabs just weren't working for me, because they were like, the color was stripping on them really easily, and then I found that they were like fraying a little bit. They just didn't hold up. They weren't as sturdy. So I started searching for more, you know, thick tabs to use, and these I get from Amazon. They are Moinkerem, Moinkerm, and it's 980 sticky flags. These are, I think, like $7 and some change a pack, which is not bad. I think that when we're talking supplies, by the way, don't feel like you have to have the fanciest supplies. Get your supplies from a dollar store, Dollar Tree, whatever. Get them cheap. Your annotation process doesn't need to be like, you know, $20, $30 worth of supplies. I just don't feel like that's necessary. I pay $7 for these, and these last a very long time for me. Granted, because I'm not annotating as much as I have been annotating in the past, and you know, luckily I just got these for free. But you could find pens at a Dollar Tree, or find, like, you know, 75 cents or $1 gel or ink pens, but don't go out there and spend a whole bunch of money. It's just not necessary. So those are the tabs that I do end up using. I do keep Post-its in my bag. So here's the funny thing about Post-its. I did have a system at one point in which every, I would say, like 50 to 75 pages, I was making kind of like a summary of what I was reading. and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So not all the time will I include sticky notes. Sometimes I use these sticky notes too if there's a particular section in a book in which I literally have a whole lot to say. I mean, like a whole lot. Or if it's a nonfiction book, or if it's a book that's drawing inspiration from something historical and it's something that I want to research or look up more about, I have a tendency to start using these, because when you think about the way that a book is written, there's not much space for you to really write a lot. So these really come in handy when there's more that I need to say. And these also come in handy when I'm annotating graphic novels. So I do annotate graphic novels. I'm going to show you an example and talk a little bit about why I annotate some graphic novels, but I do have these on hand. Now, in my old system, probably what you would have seen in that 2020 video is that I was using midliner highlighters and the double-sided midliner highlighters, which are pretty cool. And I was highlighting as I was also underlining in color and tab. It just was too much. Okay. Honestly, I got rid of the highlighting aspect because I was like, okay, I'm highlighting, I'm underlining it in a color, I'm tabbing the color. Like, I don't necessarily feel the need to highlight right now. I may go back to using the highlighters because I still do have a lot of these highlighters, but right now I just don't feel inclined to do it. So that is a part that I've kind of taken out of my annotation system. Okay, so now I'm going to show you just a couple of quick examples of some books that I have annotated. I'm going to show you one that I did in 2020, and then I'll show you one that I've done in the past, and then I'm going to show you a graphic novel. So the first example that I have here is Monday's Not Coming by Tiffany D. Jackson. This is what I mean when I say my annotation system does change a little bit, because you can see I have tabs up here at the top as well as tabs on the sides. So it's pretty interesting and pretty complex in a lot of different ways. What I do at the beginning of all of my books is that I put my notations in the beginning, so I know exactly what color means what, because my system changes so very much. So in this book, green meant plot commentary, purple meant character exploration, orange meant kind of like my personal feelings, some things that I was kind of noting as social commentary, and then the pink quotes were things that I love in terms of like my favorite quotes and writing that I just really liked. Now the top got interesting because this is a book that plays a lot with time. It's not a linear timeline. So in order to help me adjust and make sense of the timeline, I was notating exactly when the times were changing, just to help me process exactly what was going on. So this is not something that you would typically see in every book that I'm reading, because it was very specific to this book, which is once again why my annotation processes change for every single book that I'm reading. And it was nice when I was going back and thinking about the book and reviewing it that I had these as some type of explanation of what was going on with time and how time was very important to the context of this book. So this is just an example of one that I did in 2020. The next one that I have an example of is Kingdom of Souls by Rena Barron. This is one that I think I finished this one in 2019, because I finished this I think right before I had the baby, so it was 2019. Once again, we are going to see that I have my annotation system in the very beginning. So this one used 5 colors. The pink was historical cultural moments, the yellow was God's perspectives, blue was plot development, green was character development, and orange was beautiful, intriguing passage. So stuff that I was really digging. So this is where I did not underline in the color that matched the tab. So as you can see, like on this page, I was highlighting everything in black. So at that time, I was using the highlighter to let me know what color tab I needed to use, instead of what I do now, which is I just go back and I tab because I can see what color the text is underlined in. But I mean, it was an interesting thing to do it that way. I think that was just the way that I did my system that time. And this one is one that I really had fun annotating, and one that I think I definitely am going to love going back and annotating again. This is one example too where I did put the tabs like at the top here, because it was certain things that I was looking for, like the God's perspectives is one that I was definitely interested in because of the context of the book. I don't want to say too much because I don't want to spoil it, but it was extremely important. And the blue tabs on the top, the small blue tabs on the top, were just me notating like the amount of pages that I wanted to read in a day. That was it. They had no significance in terms of the book itself. That was just pacing points for me. But this is probably one of my favorite annotated books, probably because I really just love this book. But I love some of the notations or notes that I was making while reading this one. It just was a really great reading experience. So, and then I love the way it looks from the side. Like, we love to see a book that has tabs like this. It's beautiful. And the last example that I have to show you is my annotations of the complete Persepolis. So annotating a graphic novel or a comic is going to be a completely different experience than annotating a book, clearly because of the simple fact that I do not have any intentions of writing in a graphic novel or a comic book. I am like everybody else when like people are like, oh yeah, I can't write in my books. I refuse to write in my books. I'm like that with my graphic works. I will write in a non-graphic work up and down, all around, all day, every day. But when it comes to comics and graphic novels, you will not catch me writing in them because I feel like it disturbs the art. And I can't bring myself to do it. So the actual like tabs themselves, it stays the same. It pretty much does not, like the concept and idea stays the same. The difference with this is that if there's something more that I want to say, I use sticky notes or I use flags like this to add some type of notation. So I actually can say something without writing in the book itself. Like in this one, I use the sticky note to write more about that particular section. And then for the most part, what I try to do is that sometimes it could be kind of difficult to know what you are trying to kind of point out in these when you're not using an additional flag, because you're putting it on the edge. But as you can see, like there could be 3 or 4 panels where you're putting the tab. So I try to make sure that I am putting it on the row that I'm trying to highlight. And then from there, it's kind of just like, I'm just going to go with what, you know, I'm pretty sure that all those panels kind of work together to make some type of commentary about what I wanted to highlight. So where you saw that tab on the bottom, this tab right here, this yellow tab is now on the second row because I was focusing on these panels right here. And I know people are like, well, why do you want to annotate your graphic works? And I think it's the same thing as my, you know, my non-graphic books. I think that sometimes you come across some graphic works that you just feel like there's so much more that you want to say and you want to comment on it in the moment. And Persepolis definitely is one of those books where I feel like I do have a lot of commentary or things to say about the story itself. I'm probably less likely to annotate a graphic work because it's not always something that I'm looking to 100% engage in text-wise. A lot of times it could be just me tapping something where I think like the panel work is nice, but it's not necessarily a like I need to break down plot development, character development. I don't need to do all of that for a lot of the graphic novels and comics that I do end up reading. Even manga, a lot of times it's just panel work that I really like, or it's a particular spread that is really interesting and beautiful that I want to make sure I'm highlighting. So that's, you know, that's how I annotate my graphic works. But yeah, y'all, that's basically my annotation video. Like, it's not anything that's super changed, but I always like to do kind of like a small update just so people know. And sometimes there's new viewers who don't know what my annotation system is, but I'll make sure that I do link my latest annotation video up in the card symbol above. I think that one probably visually is a little bit better because I actually like flipped the camera and did flip throughs of the books. But you know, if you want to see flip throughs of my annotated books, let me know in the comment box below. As always, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more content from me, click the subscribe button, hit that bell for notification. Looking for ways to follow me on social media, support the channel, all the links will be down in the description box below, and I'll be back with another video soon.